Scientists explain God once existed. Humans named invisible phenomena and unexplainable natural disasters God. It's a ridiculous delusion. Humanity does not understand most of the laws of the world. It is foolish to deny the existence of God, even then. Science has not explained everything about the world. In fact, there are many things we do not understand. There are unknowns in something that was said to be scientifically proven, can be announced the next year as wrong. There are people who seriously believe that such fake things are the one and only truth. How do they differ from those who blindly believe in religion? They say it is true because it is reported. If we can prove the existence of an invisible entity and it is reported, do they say they believe in God? This is what I thought on the day the Great East Japan earthquake occurred. How can we create a reported miracle? First of all, miracles cannot happen without God. So I thought about whether God exists. This world came into being by chance. It has properties that can be expressed mathematically by chance, and it exists by chance according to certain laws. That's not the case. If everything were the product of chance, there would be no laws. Someone created these laws. You could even say they invented them. Is that an unintelligent being? No. Without intelligence, one cannot understand laws or mathematics, let alone create equations. Therefore, the being who created this world is intelligent. Having intelligence means having a will. Like humans. Conversely, humans are created in the image of God. This also coincides with the Bible. Now, I've proven that God exists. Next I thought about where God is. First of all, if all matter is made to follow these rules, then that means God's will permeates all matter. This leads to the conclusion that this world itself is God, rather than existing as a material object like a single human being. This is a concept similar to the 8 million gods in Shinto, or the Atman and Brahman in Hinduism. If that is the case, then we humans can be said to be parts of God, beings that are cut out of a part of God's nature. In other words, we are God. I have concluded that in a sense, the physical laws of this world are God. And it also follows that the entire world expresses God. The question here is, what kind of will does God have? My answer is that he has contradictory wills. Because we are parts of God. I am only part of God. But if you put all of us together, we are equal to God. So, God is a will that exists while holding contradictory thoughts, and the illness known as schizophrenia accurately represents God's current state. Because they are contradictory, they cannot be unified. And the current state of the world is one, in which people with different values fight each other, killing each other over which ideology is correct. This God will not save the world. Because everything is part of God. It is impossible to favor anyone over another. That would lead to denying oneself. This is also why miracles do not occur. This conclusion alone is boring. That would mean miracles don't happen. So let's think a little further. Didn't the God of this world create a God with the personality and body of a myth endowed with incredible supernatural powers? My answer is yes. I am part of God. And I resemble God. In other words, if there is a convincing reason for God's existence, then God must have created a superhuman God. From now on, I will refer to the being I have referred to as God, as a creator God. I would like you to think of God as the kind of God that appears in myth. Whether or not God was created can only be determined by knowing the reason for this world's existence. If this world was created without a purpose, then the visible world as we know it now is the answer. Since there is no purpose, the world simply exists. However, humans are doing the same thing as the Creator God when He creates the world. It is creative activity. We create worlds that didn't exist in our heads and give them form in novels, manga and anime, in a sense creating worlds. At this time, there is only one purpose. It's to stir people's emotions. In other words, the Creator God created the world in order to stir emotions like joy, anger, sorrow, and happiness. If that's the case, then the answer to the question of whether invisible gods, demons, monsters, ghosts, and souls exist can be either they do or they don't. This is because the existence of invisible beings can make a story interesting, but it can also make it boring. First, let's consider a case where a story becomes boring if a god exists. Even in today's world, there are many stories featuring heroes with superhuman powers. Let's think about a boring plot twist in a hero story. First, the hero arrives before a problem occurs and wins with no casualties. In real life, this would be considered peaceful and desirable, but as a story, it's not particularly interesting. It's moving, because the hero appears when good people are suffering, unable to do anything on their own, and desperately beg the hero for help. In other words, there is no God who appears before or immediately after a problem occurs. There are also other patterns in which gods do not exist. These are cases in which a story depicts love between humans, where supernatural powers are not necessary to defeat the villain. In such a story, the presence of gods is merely a hindrance. However, exceptions exist when the lovers have a reason why only a god can solve the problem, or in cases of a love story with a god. Furthermore, gods do not exist in stories of war between humans or stories that assume the absence of gods. On the other hand, if a god exists and the story is more interesting, the opposite of the above applies. In other words, for God to exist, there must be a demon-like being who cannot be defeated by human power, causing the entire world to fall into the depths of misery and leading to a situation where everyone prays for God's descent. When you look at the world today, it's not a terrible situation at all. Some people are in unfortunate situations, but when you look at the world as a whole, it is peaceful. As such, God will not appear in the world today under the pretext of judging the wicked. So does that mean God does not exist? That's not the case. God cannot appear, but even in the world today, there are conditions under which He can interfere. This is because there are interesting stories of gods who fall in love with humans, mediate love, help people succeed in work or sports, and grant wishes so that people can live happily. In other words, if the conditions are met, gods exist and can communicate with humans. Next, we'll consider whether there is a way in reality to communicate with such gods, and reveal the miracles they can perform, and the conditions under which they can do so. If you have any questions, or objections to my previous thinking or logical developments, please leave a comment. I would like to answer as many as possible and prove the existence of God.